So, yes, Jeff, yes.
And I apologize.
No apologies.
Call your name incorrectly.
Oh, I've been called Nolan, Rob, I've been called worse things too.
So what about bolts and nuts, tightenings, or does this thing come loose?
Excellent question, Jeff. So one thing I would suggest, and this is gonna blow a lot of people's minds, is impact guns, okay? I know a lot of people say, oh, I never want to use an impact gun on my bike because it's going to strip out hardware, that type of thing. Well, unfortunately, hardware seizes up into frames, okay? Because you're bonding two different metals. Typically, you've got maybe a steel bolt going into an aluminum frame. Sometimes you get some corrosion developed there to where that doesn't want to just pop out. And just hand turning it out will actually create a strip issue where it'll strip the head out. So it's a good idea just to have some, if you've got different types of tools, like I've got a low impact gun here that I use for a lot of the little body work pieces, that type of thing. And then when you have to get into some of the heavier stuff, it's good to just have a little stouter impact gun to where you can pop those off, okay? If you want to re-torque them by hand, that's great, that's awesome, nothing wrong with that at all. But a lot of times you need that little snap to get that bolt to kind of pop off too. Okay, so that'll give you a little help on that part. One thing to avoid on impact guns is your axle nut. You can actually gold the threads by throwing an impact nut on there or an impact gun. So you always want to hand turn your axle nuts out. If they are starting to get cruddy and nasty looking, this one's kind of getting a little dried out, definitely spray some lubricant on there. Whenever I do a rear tire change or I have to pull the wheel off, I'll actually clean this entire axle assembly, make sure all that crud is out of there, and that way when you put it back on, it's a nice clean surface. You've got a light film of grease on there. I usually just dress that axle up with just a little bit of here, work that grease all over the axle. It doesn't have to be slathered on, just a thin film, just to where you know you're not gonna have issues in the future, okay? Now one other thing, if we can kind of take a look right in here, close to that brake rotor, there is a dust seal right there, and that's actually has a little bit of grease in that dust seal. So after you pull your axle out and get the wheel pulled out, it's a good idea to clean all that area out. I usually take a little bit of carb cleaner or whatever kind of chemical that I've got to get all that crud out of there. And then you're gonna put a light film of grease right inside that seal there, and that's gonna prevent any water coming into the system, rusting things out. It helps keep some of that dirt out as well. And there again, you don't wanna slather it in there to where it's just dripping off of anything. Less is more in this case. So that'll definitely help you out in that process, okay? I think we're pretty good on oils. Any questions on any of that? Filters?
No, you talked about filter. What about like some air filters?
Air filters, yep, we'll get to that. We're actually gonna swing over to the other side and hopefully we don't get any surprises on this bike. I haven't taken a look at it, but if we kind of swing over right over Jeff's shoulder right there, we can see a really good example of a really poorly maintained air filter. Okay, so I want you to imagine running a marathon with your face stuck in a bowl of sand. That's what you ask your bike to do every time you don't maintain your filter. So clean lungs, give that filter a good cleaning. I know a lot of clients, they keep spares with them. So that way, if that one gets dirty, they can just swap out and then they don't have any downtime. Some filter cleaning agents that I prefer. So I'm not really brand specific, but these I actually like using. So this is gonna be your filter cleaner. Basically, you're gonna spray it on the filter, massage all that into it, break up all the oil. Then you're gonna rinse it out, wash it out with water. It's totally water soluble. Probably don't wanna do this in the kitchen. If you've got wifey at home, it might make her a little upset. It's a little noxious. So once you've rinsed it out, you're gonna dry the filter. And then the reason I like this filter oil is when you spray it, it actually comes out like you're actually painting something versus like some of the other brands, it's kind of a pencil stick that you're trying to draw it in and then really work that in. So basically, once you've cleaned it, you're gonna spray one light coat on your filter, massage that in, one more light coat, massage that in, and that's taken care of. Some clients prefer putting grease around their filter edges. In fact, while we're kind of on that topic, we can kind of swing over here. Okay, let's see what we got under here. Okay, so we're gonna see what the filter looks like this, see if we're in bad shape or not. This is a well-maintained filter, okay? That actually makes me really happy because then it doesn't make me suspect the engine at all. So on this filter, they've already re-oiled it. It's plenty clean. But this one, yep, they've got a little grease on here. You'll notice that they put a little layer of grease just for an extra sealing surface right around there. So that's totally okay to do. From the factory, they typically won't come like that, but if you want to do a little extra, that's totally fine to do. All right, and the other thing I would recommend is cleaning out your air box as well, because all these elements are kind of sitting in your stagnant. A lot of your air boxes will have a light little drain down here at the bottom. Usually it's got a little rubber grommet on it with kind of a little flapper that you can kind of squeeze, and it'll open that flap up and you can get a lot of the crud out. So maintain your air box. Think of it, okay, I want to keep my lungs clean in the bike, so how am I going to do that? Okay. Usually just a solvent or a light cleaner. I usually use like a carb cleaner on a rag. I'll just soak the rag down a little bit and wipe all that junk out. That'll help break up the grease as well. And then once that's all clean, got a clean filter, can reinstall that. That part's handled. Just like so. We'll rascal in there, perfect. Actually, gonna throw the strap up here so we don't have any incidences. Okay, so clean air filters, kind of reversing back to our oil. Okay, so this particular model on the Husqvarna, it's actually got a lot of different oil filters. So this one here is a disposable filter here. So get familiar with your bike. If you've got a lot of the same type of hardware on your bike, this particular bike has an 8mm 30 Torx combo head on a lot of the hardware points. So there you've got those kind of combo heads, 8mm 30 Torx combos. Zip those out. Typically you have to pluck the cap off with a screwdriver, and that one's going to be more of a cartridge style in there. So you're going to chuck that filter and then just plug a new one back in and cap it up. If you happen to have this model or make of bike, there typically is an O-ring around that filler or that cap right there. So I'd nestle that cap down flush before you zip those bolts down, and that way you won't risk the chance of pinching the O-ring. If you're curious on torque specs, this one's actually 8 foot-pounds of torque on this particular bike. But like I said, get into your owner's manual, check out the specs, and then you're gonna have proper torque specs. One thing I do try to make happen on my bikes is I try not to mismatch hardware all over the place, because then it makes it difficult to work on the bike. So if kind of the standard bolts are this, and maybe I've got a weird oddball bolt over here, then I've got to go back to my toolbox and find a different socket just to fit that one bolt. So if maybe you have a situation like that, take the extra effort and make sure that you've got those matching bolts that are from the factory, and then you're not going to have those little griefy problems as you're going down the road and maybe having to pack some extra tools that normally you wouldn't have to pack in those situations. Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about some minor things like your shifter. Okay, it is a good idea to have your shifter adjusted properly. So kind of back on getting on our bike and sitting and making sure that the hand controls are adjusted properly. I would recommend getting your moto boots on, sit on your bike, see where your shifter feels good at. Okay, my particular bike, I actually had to bump my shifter up 1 notch just to accommodate the larger toe box on my boot. So make sure the bike fits you properly. That's going to give you a better ride. It's going to help you perform better out in the wilderness out there, or out in the real world, and then you know you're good. Sometimes these get a little worn out just by usage, so if you start seeing a lot of slippage on them or something like that, sometimes the splines will start to go south on you. So it's okay to put a good new shifter on there. There's a lot of neat aftermarket ones. This one is actually an aftermarket one that's got a foldable toe shoe on it. So just depends on what you want on it. Foot pegs, good idea to have some good solid foot pegs if they're starting to get trashed out or a little worn. If they're starting to get a little worn, you can take a little file and sharpen up those teeth a little bit. Or if they're bent or tweaked, just go ahead and replace them. That way you've got a good foothold on your bike and you're not worried about the thing coming out from underneath you. Okay. All right. Side stand, if you do have one of these, hopefully you're fortunate. You can notice this one's actually getting kind of dried out and a little crusty on it. It's not returning the way it normally does. So take some lubricant, spray it in there to where that's working properly. You know it's going to function for you good. If you've got any rotating parts, springs or anything like that, take a little snug up on some of those parts and make sure you're not going to lose any hardware as you go down the road. Nothing worse than getting to a spot and going to throw down your side stand and you didn't realize you left it a mile down the road, and then you've got to turn it into a tree leaner.
Well, that kind of lubricant, what type of lubricant?
You know, this is, something silicone based, something very universal, maybe a white lithium grease or something like that. Something to where it's going to hold up to the water and the outside elements a little better. If you're in a pinch, WD works out just great. I mean, I'm not a promoter of that product, but it works in some of those situations, and it works just fine. It does dry out a little easier just because it is kind of a water base. But anything to keep that lubricated up, and you should be good to go there. But definitely make sure that's working for you. That way you're not fighting it, trying to put it up and down and all those situations as well. All right, we're just going to put this panel back on here. Get that out of the way.